Hello, I'm Steve Weberg. I'm with the public affairs staff of the Kansas City Public Library, and I want to thank you for joining us this evening. As many, if not all of you know, the library returned to close to normal operations at all of its locations this month, and it's great having you back inside our buildings. We're still doing indoor group gatherings like these signature events that we're having tonight. We're doing them virtually, but we're planning to resume them in person in our auditoriums at the Central Library and at the Plaza Branch this fall, and you'll hear more about that soon. One of the delights in reopening our buildings has been resuming our art exhibits in the two formal art galleries in the Central Library. Tonight, we're focusing on the first one to go on display since March 2020. It's a unique, just entrancing exhibition, Flora and Fauxna. And we're joined tonight by its creator, renowned photographer and artist, Patty Carroll. Patty's a native of the Chicago area. Her work has been exhibited nationally and internationally, and Kansas City's been privileged to have her as part of its dynamic arts community for the past 6.5 years. Privileged, too, to have her husband, Tony Jones, serve in that time as president of the Kansas City Art Institute. If you haven't yet stopped by, Flora and Fauxna will be on display at the Central Library in the Genevieve Guldner Gallery on the first floor through August 15th. It is unique, colorful, and immersive. As one visitor wrote in the gallery guest book, quote, "a lovely, extraordinary exhibit," unquote. And I thought another visitor captured the effect of the exhibition very well in another comment, writing, "Thank you for a fulfilling respite to my day." It really is a step into a scenic, bucolic, restful world. You're going to hear some birds chirping that Patty Carroll has created, down to those chirps and the singing. Those birds are part of each of the panels. Patty is speaking from the Guldner Gallery, and we have included this first 15-minute part of our presentation. We pre-recorded it, as she is actually going to be speaking live and then joining us from Indiana. But we pre-recorded this, her presentation from the Guldner Gallery. And then Patty and I will rejoin after the video presentation for a Q&A, an extended Q&A, and look forward to you all joining us in that. If you've got a question over the course of the evening for Patty, you can submit it via the YouTube live chat box, and we'll get as many answered as we can after the presentation. Patty, I've so enjoyed working with you as we've mounted this exhibition, and so enjoyed experiencing it. I dropped by the gallery again today in the Central Library. Thanks so much for the exhibit, and thanks so much for being with us tonight. Patty Carroll.
Thank you. I totally appreciate the opportunity to exhibit the work and to make the installation, as well as work with you, Steve, and everybody else with the Kansas City Public Library. Everyone has been very professional and wonderful to work with. And of course, Midwest, Kansas City, nice. So thank you again. I hope you enjoy it.
Thank you. It's an honor, a privilege, and a real enjoyment for me to be at the library. This space is really a kind of a manufactured space. The gallery actually goes a little bit larger, but we wanted to contain the exhibition so that you could feel part of it. The whole thing is about women and the home, which is what all my work is about. But in this case, I'm using decorative objects from the home that are creating this installation. And we really relish decorative objects as women. I think it's what makes our homes pleasant and homey and is part of our identity and what we surround ourselves with, it seems to me, creates an atmosphere not just for our families, but who we are as people. So in this case, I've been using birds and ceramic birds and floral fabric, as well as from the crafting world, a lot of fake flowers and other floral bits. The objects, the birds as objects, are really, they have meaning for several reasons, but as a collectible, they also represent the lives that other people have used them for. So I find a lot of these objects in antique stores and thrift stores and garage sales, etc. And so the objects themselves have been used or decorated someone else's home at some point, or been collected by someone as part of their identity. So this is a whole reuse and recycle image. So typically the other part of using birds is that as women, we have nesting inclinations, and birds, of course, make their own nests and hide them in the trees. And the way that some of this project started was because I was making photographs using these collectible birds, kind of the same way, with a floral background and fake flowers and things. And I was making still lifes of them in the studio. I got to this because my other work as a photographer is based on women. I have a series called Anonymous Women, and the latest iteration of it is called Domestic Demise. And it's where a woman is in her home and she's surrounded by her objects and her collections and her activities, and she is overwhelmed by them. And so in doing that, I started thinking also about how birds kind of do the same thing. They make these homes. They're hidden from our view. Often I can hear birds in trees, but I never get to see them necessarily. It's very hard to find a bird's nest because it's camouflaged within the trees and leaves, etc. So the birds became kind of a symbol for my women and the women, and as well as the fact that the word bird was a pejorative, possibly. It was a word that was used in Britain, especially in the 60s, meaning girl. Chick was also another word used for that. So there's a kind of little play with the idea of nesting and home and camouflage and women and birds in this whole thing. I think that this also reference, this installation and the birds themselves reference the idea of collecting. And when I started making the photographs, which then became these installations, these assemblages, basically, I had in my studio, bins of floral things and some birds. And one day a lady came to the studio and she said, "Oh, my mother collects birds." And I said, "Oh, cool." So she brought her by, and a few weeks later, and I showed her the pictures and what I was doing with the birds and how these still lifes were coming together. And she said, "Well, we have a few birds for you in the car." And so she brought up 3 boxes of birds for me. And so then my collection then grew from this woman's collection. Her name was Doris. And this started a relationship. I then photographed the birds that she gave me and made my still lifes, took her back the pictures so that she could enjoy the pictures of her birds in a different context. And then she gave me another 3 or 4 boxes. And this went on for quite a while. And so my collection grew because she had been collecting these birds, as well as me finding them in, like I said, antique stores, thrift stores, whatever. So I think, and by the way, everything, even though she gave me all these birds, it still never made a dent in her house. So what was kind of wonderful was the idea that these are transformed into a new life and a new kind of way of seeing these collectible objects. But they reference the woman and other women who have collected things as part of their home atmosphere. So the other thing is that the decorative objects that we use in our homes, especially like this, which refer to nature, is really about our idea of domesticating nature. We do this with other things too, like for instance, people's lawns have to be perfect, so that you don't have a wild, woolly, crazy, yard in front of your house. So we have this tendency as people, I guess, to domesticate the wildness around us. And these birds in this installation represents some of that. The other thing that this is about is craft. And craft has had, I think, a big resurgence in the last 10, 20 years, probably due to Martha Stewart and her Good Things and her magazine. Before, craft was kind of seen as a lowly form of making art. And I think what has happened now is that craft and art, as two separate things, the lines have been blurred quite a bit. And so that the idea of craft or art is not one or the other, but it can be both. And a lot of what this is about is also about transforming it into a new form, but making something that references women's craft, but also transforms it into an art installation. And I'm hoping that people will enjoy it and pick up on that kind of references. The other thing about crafts projects is it's a reference to women's work. You do see men making crafts. They like to make birdhouses and fences and all kinds of. My husband likes to make window boxes, but this is about interior and about women, and so the crafting part of it is important to me, as well as the way it looks. To which I will show you how they're made. So each one of these, I call them an assemblage, is actually, I'm going to show you the back, is actually has a frame around it, and this is a piece of fiberboard insulation, and then it's backed with these 1x2s. I put D-rings on so that we can hang them, and then it's covered with floral fabric, and the floral fabric then becomes the background, and from there I select birds that will match the colors in the fabric, and also use floral elements like flowers or leaves or whatever to enhance this kind of a composition. The birds, as you can see, they also stick out from the side, and so the birds are mounted on something that is holding them onto this substructure. And it's usually like an L bracket, or sometimes it's plexiglass or whatever. And then the birds are glued onto that, and then everything else is stuck on. So the materials are a combination of what you find in a hardware store, as well as a craft store, as well as a home. So it's a kind of combination of materials and a different way of working for me, especially because I was trained as a photographer, and it's not about lighting or cameras or the normal photographic issues. It's my tools in this are hot glue and staple guns and drills and saws, and it's really refreshing to be able to work with other materials that are hands-on. And one of the things that I appreciate about Kansas City is that it's a maker's town. And so I see a lot of, especially even the students at KCAI, they're very interested in making things, not just thinking about them as a concept. So hopefully this is a reference also to the Kansas City making tradition. Part of the installation is the background fabric. I used this background fabric, which is darker, to enclose the space, and then put the squares on it. This whole installation actually, conceptually for me, started as a wall quilt, a kind of 2D, 3D wall quilt, where it would just be one piece with these squares. Each of the squares is 14 inches, which is a typical wall quilt size. And then a curator one day came into my studio and said, well, what would you think about making it a whole room? And I said, oh, great idea. Little did I know that that would take me months and months and months to produce. But so each one, that's the other thing. And so using the background material encloses the space, and I feel like it's kind of like being in a Victorian living room, maybe. Very, it has that kind of dark and overabundance of visual materials, and you feel kind of cozy in it. If you wander around the space, there are motion detectors on some of the squares of the assemblages, and they're kind of random, and the birds will chirp when you walk by them. So it's a little random. We have them turned off right now, but they will go on as we walk around the space. I also included in this installation this bench to sit on, because I believe that it's nicer to be able to sit and enjoy an exhibition instead of just walking around. Part of my philosophy also in making that, I really want whatever I make to be accessible and understood by a wide audience, not just an art audience. So the idea of mixing up art and craft, putting it in a space that's more public, making a room out of it instead of just a piece on a wall, they're all part of making something that I'm hoping a lot of people can enjoy and kind of participate in. So the photographs and the installation pieces are from this series refer to our instincts to tame and humanize our experiences in the home and with nature, and comment on the world of women's collecting and making. The ones that have the same background are actually the ones that are causing the birds to chirp and tweet, etc. The other thing about the arrangement is that it's pretty much random. So after we put up the background, then we looked and said, we started randomly and said, okay, let's start with this piece. And from there, we just would select another piece that seemed like it would go with it, but not compete with it. So, we couldn't have too many dark pieces together, we couldn't have too many light pieces together, etc. But also, the thing that I think is really fun about these is that some of them, really stick out from the wall, and some of them are just kind of a little bit flatter. It's a little hard to take in the whole thing all together, I think. but if you look then at individual pieces, it becomes a little bit more manageable. The other thing is that even though this ends up being large, it's really based on lots of little things. So I was very happy to be able to make small pieces that then became part of a bigger whole.
Patty, that was terrific. And you are now going to join us from Indiana, not far from Lake Michigan, I believe. I hope your weather might be a little better than what we are experiencing here in the Kansas City area. We have some audience questions, but before we get to them, I had a question to start with. If I'm not mistaken, I think that your interest in addressing your art to women in the home goes back to some experiences that you had back in the 1990s. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I was my husband and I had moved to London, and I was completely dumbfounded by the fact that it was a society completely not just different, but even though we share the same language and I could understand what people were saying, the meanings were completely different and separate. And so because I was completely unknown to anyone there, people were calling me Mrs. Jones, which I am actually. And it kind of made me realize that most women like myself were understood in terms of their domestic or marital status. And I was kind of freaking out because I had spent a long time creating my own career and becoming a photographer and teaching and doing all kinds of things. And so I was always known as Patty Carroll, the photographer. And when we got to London, that all just went haywire. So I started making these pictures of a woman who, from like the waist, like shoulders up and her head, and we painted her white so that she would be more of a white woman. And we put domestic objects in front of her so that it obscured her identity, because my idea was that women are only seen through their domestic status, and using those domestic objects seemed to be the way to show that. And so I created this project called Anonymous Women. And it's all about women being hidden within their own domestic stuff, whether it's an object or two, a pot or a pan or food or decorative things. It all became part of, like, you identify with the home, you identify with being a homemaker, or as we say in America, a housewife. And so that's how it all started. And it freaked me out. And I had never actually dealt with that before. I mean, I guess I was too headstrong or maybe stupid. I don't know. But the point is that it really struck me. And so it impelled me to do this whole Anonymous Women series, which I have been doing for now over 20 years. And that led to the idea of birds and nesting, and they're camouflaged in their homes, which are trees, and birds were kind of a symbol for women. And so it all kind of came together with this, and it kind of evolved out of that initial identity crisis.
That focus on the home and the nesting part of it, did that become all the more relevant during the pandemic when so many people were confined to home?
Yes, and who knew that any of us would have whatever kind of reaction we had to being confined. And I know myself, for myself, although I would still go to my studio from my home, where I could be alone at home or I could be alone in the studio, it didn't matter. But suddenly other things became more important during the pandemic. And my work also, to me, took on a different kind of meaning, because it was always about women in the home, but being confined and being looking at the home in a completely different way just somehow exploded in my head. So yes. Did it make a difference? It made a huge difference. And do I cook more? Yes, I do.
So in your work, are you simply acknowledging these things, or are you making a statement or statements about it? Are you critiquing? Are you satirizing?
I would say I'm doing both. I'm hoping. I'm if I say I'm critiquing, it's only in a good way. It's a way for us women to look at ourselves and to consider, who we are in relation to our home as well as other things. But it's also a celebration of that. I really feel that we do not need to put ourselves down for having a relationship with our home and the idea of making a beautiful home and making it wonderful for our family and friends and ourselves. So I look at it and I laugh at myself as well as other women, but I also am completely encouraging it. My life is spent going to home goods and antique stores, and so and in some ways, like, not this work in particular, but the other work is what would I say? I get to make a lot of different homes, and it's really fun. And the birds are also a way of thinking about decor and what we surround ourselves with. And it's fun, but it's also a critique of, like, making us look at what we do surround ourselves with.
It's an interesting question from an audience member here. I hope you talk a little bit about how and why the birds seem to blend into the backgrounds of each square, and how that might represent women's place in society.
Well, isn't that interesting? Because, don't we all blend into our environment? And I can't think of, I can think of so many and none at all at the same time examples of how women are dismissed or not considered forefront, and they're considered part of the background of the lives of families or the home, etc. So the idea that women are camouflaged, or the birds representing women are camouflaged in their homes, to me is just a very powerful and very important idea that we should probably break out of. but that's why I say it's both a critique and a celebration.
Audience question here related to the birds, and intrigued by the motion detectors and the bird noises. It's almost like the birds are chirping a warning, but to whom? Would it be the other birds? Would it be to the viewers?
Actually, I think that every time I'm sitting in the backyard, actually at our house in Kansas City, where we have a lot of birds, which is so wonderful, I watch these birds like flying around and going into the bird bath, and and having pecking order of who goes where, and etc. And I always think, like, what are they talking about? What are they saying? Are they talking to each other? Are they warning about predators? Are they giving each other tips on, like, okay, here's the best thing to make a nest? I don't really know, and I've kind of lost the track of this. But my point is that I just thought it would be fun to have another element that added a little interaction and also brought you back to the wild in this installation. So that's why it was included.
And you've often referred, when talking about these works, to women and your words, their complicated relationship with domesticity. And I think you touched on that a little bit, if not a lot, in your anecdote about moving to England and being Mrs. Jones. But in what way is that relationship complicated? And is it complicated for you beyond that those references in Britain and your identity in Britain to them as Mrs. Jones?
Well, I think that especially now, not just about the pandemic, but the younger generations of women are really expected to do everything. Some of us older women, if we did everything, it was usually at the expense of something, whether it was the kids or the who took who to soccer practice or whatever. But I think that that women now are expected to do so many things. They expect to have careers, and they want to have the perfect house, and they have kids, and they have so many, and husbands and lives and social lives. And so it becomes a really balancing act for so many women. And I totally appreciate that. But at the same time, I think that women love their homes. And I always use the example of my niece, she was a captain in the Marine Corps. She went to Iraq. She is a fabulously smart person. She married another Marine captain. They have 3 kids and 2 houses and dogs and nannies and the whole shebang. And she is as important in her work. She's an executive at Amazon now. She is as involved with her work as an executive as she is with her kids and what they're doing and their successes and progress and schoolwork, etc., as well as her home. And when she calls me, she's like, "Do you think this couch will work?" So it's really, we really have so many things on our plates. And it used to be that you were either kind of at home or at work. But now women are all of the above. And so it becomes a much more complicated thing for their identity. And one day they're mom, and the next day they're the boss. And, there's so many different issues with identity in women today. So I'm hoping that some of this work hints at least at that.
I mean, it sounds like your niece has, she's comfortable with the balancing act that she's able to pull. But for a lot of women, I suspect, and I can't identify with this, but for a lot of women, I suspect that's much more of a struggle.
I think so, especially, trying to make ends meet with all the things. And certainly during the pandemic, this brought this all out, of, how do I homeschool as well as keep my job, as well as cook meals and, all of the things that you have to do. So there's some women are comfortable with it, but not all the time either. And a lot of women don't have those same choices. So it's a complicated relationship that we have with our homes and with our jobs in society.
People who come to see this exhibit are going to be struck, I'm sure, as I was when I first saw it all assembled, by just the saturation of color. And that really runs throughout all of your works from everything that I've seen. Has that always been an emphasis for you?
Yes. Even when I started photography, I couldn't wait to get into the color darkroom. And I was so interested in color. And I think I'm like a kid that only likes saturated colors, and bright, very, reds, yellows, blues, etc. So even though not all of the images in this are that saturated, I'm very interested in how color affects us, because different colors present different moods and can affect us in different ways that we are not necessarily conscious of. So I've always been very interested in color as not just an emotion, but as a force in imagery. And And so I'm hoping this exhibition and installation is also really a bit overwhelming because of the amount of pattern as well as objects and color. So it becomes kind of an overload of experience, in visual experience. But, I say go for it.
You're from the Chicago area. Where exactly?
I grew up in the suburbs of
Okay.
Chicago, Park Ridge, and all of that certainly plays into all of this because
That's what I wanted to ask you about.
yeah.
How so?
Well, I think that, I was brought up to be a suburban housewife, and I took a wrong turn somewhere and started to have a career and wanted to become an artist and do things that suburban mothers don't necessarily do. But it all comes back to my roots, and most of my work is really about my mother's experience, and this work is really about the idea of making a suburban home be wonderful. I can't get away from it, and I'm happy not to. And the other thing is that, we are in an age, especially in art, where the people who are really getting attention and deservedly so are especially Black artists and Black women and all kinds of people of color, as Asian, all kinds of people, which is so necessary. But us little white women haven't really gotten the same amount of attention. So I'm always kind of going, yeah, but what about us? It used to be just the guys, but we're here too. So anyway, that's part of my deal.
You talked during your presentation about wanting to make art accessible to a wide variety of audiences. And so, this exhibition is in a public library, not necessarily. We have two, wonderful art galleries. Kansas City Public Library has decided to put an emphasis on art. We're really proud of this exhibition and all that we bring in, but it's not a formal gallery. It's not the Nelson or the Kemper by any means. But in terms of accessibility, what does setting an exhibition like this in a public library accomplish?
Well, in all of my work, I'm really interested in not just the art audience experiencing it. So this is a very wonderful opportunity to see how the public in general, which is not the art public necessarily, will experience and react. I'm an artist, and somebody said to me at a reception last night, she said, and you don't use big words. I was like, yeah, because I don't believe in big words. I do believe in theory, and I do believe in concept as well as making things, but I really want people to be able to understand art, not just mine, but anybody's. And it's not always an easy task to do. So I'm hoping that the idea of this exhibition, which is part craft and part art and part installation and part sound and part, a bunch of things, that anybody could enjoy it and look at some of the elements in a different way than they had ever thought about them before.
To what degree do you think that idea of kind of widening the audience, getting into, maybe some non-traditional art venues and getting the art in front of some non-traditional art viewers, to what degree do you think that's being embraced in the arts community? Do you think other artists are moving in that direction as well?
Totally. And I think that the art world is also, like, for instance, in Kansas City, they have the Billboard Project, which is, putting people's art up on billboards, the murals all over town, which are really fabulous. I think all of those kinds of activities, that I know that there's a big call for art for the airport. And you'll see it in other airports and places too. But I think that having opportunities like that takes the kind of stigma of like, ooh, I don't want to go to that. It's a gallery, or it's a museum. I don't know anything about art. So when there are bridge situations like this one is, like the library provides a wonderful gallery, but it's also a bridge to people who might not go to a gallery, just like a mural would be. And so I think that we're now moving into a whole new realm of art that is embracing a variety of situations and people and artists who are trying to not just stick to the old rules of the white walls in a gallery.
I think it's refreshing.
I do too. Having said that, though, I really love my gallery in Kansas City.
Well,
Sherry Leedy, I want to put a plug in for her.
Well, and obviously we are not going to replace those
No.
great art galleries, all the way up to the Nelson and the Kemper. But one thing that I think venues like the library is it also gives opportunities to local artists who aren't going to get into the big time galleries.
That's true.
And that is actually part of our hope in having these two galleries, is to be able to exhibit local artists some. You made your reputation as a photographer. I mean, you taught photography for more than 40 years. But do you find yourself increasingly drawn to this three-dimensional art? I believe this is your first full departure from photography. It's your first fully three-dimensional exhibition. Is that a direction you lean to now?
I can't predict what's going to happen. It's kind of, the pandemic taught us that you can't say, oh yeah, I'm going to take this trajectory and go with it. I have in some of the larger exhibitions that I've had in the last few years, I have included both the photographs as well as smaller installations, which I think give context to the photographs and vice versa. And so this one is completely without the photographs, and it's, as you said, it's a new direction for me. I'm not sure. I can't predict what's going to happen next. I never could have predicted doing these kinds of things either. So, and when an artist says, oh, I'm going to do this, I wouldn't believe them, to be honest, because you go in the studio and you're like, let's try this today. There's always that element. But I am sticking to photography, and I am doing still lifes, and I am still keeping that alive, even though I have this maker crafter urge in me that I can't, like, the itch is there, so I can't really not scratch it.
Does Flora and Fauxna, this exhibit, go anywhere from here? Are there other exhibitions planned, or at least hoped for?
I have not planned one yet. I only wish it would go somewhere else. I don't want to store it anymore. But I think it's really fun. And so I would really like it to go to another space that is another situation like the library, where it's in a more public place than just a gallery. So I will be looking for that. I just haven't pursued it yet.
I hope it's not an indelicate question, but you have some 250 pieces of individual art that make up this one exhibition. And I reading some of the comments in the gallery that I alluded to at the top, people really get a lot out of it. This is one that I think people can get a 13 by 13 piece of this exhibit. I mean, is there any chance that if somebody was interested in some of these works, some of these individual squares, that they would be for sale?
Yes. $250 for a square. If you want it, let me know. I'm happy to sell it. I think on the last day, we should just have a big sale of them. And if anybody wants to enjoy them in their homes, I'm happy to sell them to them.
And no extra for the motion sensors and the bird noises.
No, and you can turn them off if you want to.
Yeah, in fact, a funny story, when the exhibit first opened, the 1st of June, the birds were loud enough. People were saying they could hear them the minute they walked into the library, and they actually were becoming a little bothersome to the staff. And so we did get them turned down a little bit. So it's a little more subtle now for those of you who come in. But it really is, I think it adds to the immersion of it. It adds to the atmosphere of it. Finally, and we're running out of time, I want to ask you, your husband, Tony Jones, is president of Kansas City Art Institute, and he's retiring next June. So what are in your plans, his plans, your plans together?
You never know. You never know. We never expected to come to Kansas City, and it was a complete delight. And so I don't want to say, oh yeah, we're just going to fade off into the distance and go to the beach or something. I can't say. Who knows?
Well, Patty, it's been our pleasure and our privilege. It has been Kansas City's pleasure and Kansas City's privilege to have had you here for the 6.5 years that we've had you, and for at least another one, going into next June. And I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed working with you on this exhibit, how much I enjoy the exhibit. I think I'm the kind of commoner that you're looking to get in front of these kinds of exhibits. And I really do highly recommend it. The exhibit, again, is Flora and Fauxna. It runs through August 15th at the Kansas City Public Library. Walk through the front door of the Central Library and just follow the bird sounds. And you'll get there, but you won't regret it. It is a unique exhibit. Patty, thank you so much for the exhibit. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. It was really fun.
Thank all of you for joining us tonight. Look forward to seeing you again.